Welcome to That's Good Craic.
With me, Dan, Colin.
How is? What's the crack?
And Mick.
Yo, yo, yo.
Listen to our podcast every Wednesday.
So welcome to episode 11 of That's Good Craic. This episode, we have a very, very, very special guest with us today. A legend of the Irish dance music scene, 20 years experience with over 150 million streams via Apple Music and Spotify. He's our friend and yours, the true legend that is John Gibbons. How you doing, John boy?
Really good. I appreciate that intro. I've been accused of being special many times in the past, but never in such a complimentary way. So thank you for that.
also, may I forget, he has an incredible podcast. Before we crack into it here, he has an incredible podcast that the three of us, the three guys, myself, Danny and Mick, are big fans of. Alchemy Radio, over 100,000 subscribers. If you haven't listened to it yet, I think we can all say we recommend it highly. So
there's a really good episode, not to plug it too much, coming up next time, which is it's actually three lads from Ireland who you may have heard of, Mick, Dan and Colin. So they're going to be on the next episode. So check out Alchemy.
Yeah, check it out. So what's the crack, Mick, Danny? How's things, lads?
Crack is good. Delighted to have John on, and very, very happy with that. How are you, Dan?
The crack is mighty, and welcome, John. I'm in great form, had a good weekend, feeling nice and relaxed, and delighted to have a great guest on it.
Oh, well, I'm delighted to be here, genuinely. Thanks so much. I'm a big fan and an avid listener to your podcast, so to actually be on it is something that I hadn't really contemplated, and I'm very pleased to be here, so looking forward to the chats.
Jeez, we're all but group hugging here at the minute.
What are we going to get in the same room?
Here, call over there. We'll hug it. No, John, what kind of I suppose why we were interested to have you on our podcast is because I know you a long time. One, we've done a lot of stuff together in terms of going to events, dance music, working together, all that kind of stuff, and I've seen you drunk once, and when I say drunk, man, I mean 3 bottles, a little bit tipsy, and maybe nearly 10 years now, is it? 10 years in around.
I think I know the night in question.
Let's not get into that. And it always fascinated me, because before I actually knew you, I always remember when you had that time when you kind of exploded onto the scene with your number one in the Irish dance charts back in, when was it, 2005?
No, it was either 2008 or 2009. I'm not entirely sure, but it's around the 10-year mark. Sometimes it feels like 20 years, sometimes it feels like a couple of months ago. It's weird.
Yeah, I just always remember, you'd hear, when you were heavy gigging with Electric and all that, and you had that whole thing going, and the drug scene in Ireland was fucking crazy back then, it still is, but like, there was a lot of partying, and that was my picture of you, was, and you'd hear stories, like, the bullshit stories you'd hear around, partying with John Gibbons and all that, and then, there was a bowl of ease on the table in the back room at the nightclub, like, it's pure. Yeah. And then I met you, mate, and you didn't even fucking drink, like, you know what I mean? Really, like, you'd have the bottle of water.
Yeah, and to this day, it's still the bottle of water. It's funny you say that, though, about rumours, not to cut across you, but very briefly. I mean, I've heard so many rumours about myself and about my hard party lifestyle and about how, I'm getting out of hand with the drugs and this, that, and the other. I mean, I've never done a drug in my life, genuinely. Yeah. And it's funny just hearing these stories back. It's the association, the assumption that because I work in a particular environment and I'm surrounded by people doing A, B, C, and D, that I must be doing X, Y, and Z as well as A, B, C, and D. And it couldn't have been further from the truth in reality,
John, just to kind of this is something that it's kind of it's always intrigued me about you, like, you know what I mean, that like Colin has been friends with you a long time. I've been friends with Colin a long time, so you come up sporadically, you'd be doing different things and stuff like that, and it was actually a long period of time that I would have heard your name before I actually found out, like, no, you don't really drink or do drugs at all. And I was like, what? It just didn't add up to me. So like, how did it come about that like a top DJ in a scene that is synonymous with drug use, you know, let's be real, and how did it come that you're almost teetotal? Like, how did that come about?
It's a funny one, Mick, to be honest. It was never actually a conscious decision. It was more by accident than design. Like, I started DJing and the bug bit me very, very early. I was in school, I think about 4th year or 5th year in school, so I don't know, maybe 15. And I started doing discos. And from the get-go, I was DJing every single weekend. And it's all I wanted to do in my spare time. It was funny, I was in a band at the time, and that just completely, I pissed off quite a number of lads who had been associated with the band and in the band by just upping and leaving. Not that we were any good, but because of that, when my friends and my group would have started drinking and would have been in a field and they would have been having a few cans or whatever they were doing, I was never there, for the simple reason that I was like shadowing some other older DJ who was doing a wedding or a 21st or a party or whatever it might have been. I was always somewhere else, physically somewhere else. And then when we were kind of old enough to go to bars, the bars that the lads were going to for the first time were the very same bars that I was actually DJing in as well. So I was still having the crack with the lads, but I had a totally different perspective. I was at work and I was probably having a better time than they were because I loved it so much. But for me, it was without the drink, because as soon as I was old enough to drive at 17, I was driving, and I was driving myself to gigs. And obviously, drink couldn't come into the equation at that point. So the early years of drinking passed me by in a way that they were unavoidable for so many other people. I had something specific that was distracting me from that social scene. And as time went on, I mean, again, I was always driving. I was always DJing. When I went to college, I was DJing kind of 6-7 nights a week for a number of years. I mean, I was doing that for the bones of 10 years, 6 or 7 nights a week. And again, the car was always a part of it. So I never felt I was missing out with anything, because people would tend to gravitate, like my friends would tend to gravitate towards where I was playing anyway. So I wasn't excluded from the group. I was still seeing my friends. I was still, in a sense, socializing with them. Just for me, drink was never part of the equation. And what I was doing felt like the most natural thing in the world to me, even though I could see it was different to what everyone else was doing. If I'm honest, I felt a little bit special in that I was, not because I wasn't drinking, but because I was the focal point of the party, if you like. I mean, there was a certain ego attached to it, and I don't think I'm the most egotistical person, and that's never what drove me, but I did like it. I mean, there was a certain amount of attention that came with it that I did feed off in a way that maybe that compensated for some of my insecurities, in a way that drink might mask it for others, or drugs might mask it for others. I think that little buzz that I got from being the life and soul of the party without having to make a fool of myself, not that everybody does, but a lot of people do when they're experimenting with drink and drugs in the early days. That risk factor wasn't there for me, and all the kind of negative byproducts of the pub environment or the drinking environment or drugs environment that existed in Ireland when we were growing up just wasn't a feature for me. So again, that's a long-winded answer to what was kind of a simple question, Mick, but it was an accidental thing, and I never sat down with myself and said, right, I'm just going to avoid that because I see the bad effects that it's having, because I never really did see the bad effects. You know, I mean, I did my gig and I went home, or I might stay out for a little while with the lads or whatever, but there was never the kind of after gig scene for me, or the after party. I just get too tired still to this day. I was never one for the after party, so I probably never saw the darker side of it that maybe a lot of other people would have been, or you might have been exposed to over the years. And again, it was an accidental thing.
Yeah, cool.
No, I get you, man, and it's what I'm kind of, I suppose, what I'm very interested in as well at the same time is the kind of the psychology behind it. Like, you know, what, like the amount of times where, like, even when you go back to the Homelands days, do you remember Homelands? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the drugs that were taken at those things were absolutely insane. People being resuscitated in the tent like fucking heart machines. You know, it was crazy. Yeah. It was a crazy fucking time. It was a crazy, crazy time, and the fact that you managed to avoid all that kind of stuff while being balls deep in the whole thing, because you know, when I start kind of doing stuff with you, like working, doing some photos and videos and all that years ago, that was the first time I really started going to clubs raves, not even closed, man, because they were proper raves. When you go back to the tripod days and all that, that was a proper they were proper gigs, like, you know.
Yeah.
And that was my first time, and I attribute a lot of the fact that I've been to parties now all over the world, like big festivals and raves and all that kind of stuff, while not drinking and not taking drugs. I kind of going to those things with you in the early days really helped me, because like you said, I had a purpose there. I had a camera and I was in my own world, you know, and I kind of got I got more from doing that than I ever did from the drugs and that. So, man, I was one of those idiots, like, where he'd take some drugs and he'd just be absolutely buckled in the corner. I'm sure you've seen a few of them in your time, like
many ones. And it's funny, because I found that when we started doing stuff together as well, I was really struck by how much you just loved the atmosphere of it. And you said it to me in the early days a few times, man, it's mad, like, in the past you would have been in a particular way, and now you didn't even feel any kind of inclination towards it, and you were able to just enjoy it for what it was. But then we look around us in a club where there are 1,000 people or whatever, and there are so many people, and there's no way they can remember it the next day. I mean, do they have those same memories of gigs 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago that we went to? I mean, it's almost photographic for me. It's probably the same as you. And I doubt they can remember a thing from it, you know. So to me, I'd see a lot of that going on, and I think subconsciously I'd think to myself, like, well, what's the point of that as well, you know? So it was another barrier between me and that side of the lifestyle, you know.
What? Go ahead, Danny.
There's an interesting one, John, because I would have DJ'd for, not to the level that you DJ'd, but I DJ'd as a resident in quite a large club in the west of Ireland. I was a resident for about 7.5 years.
Which club,
it was a Passion nightclub in Craic and Shannon. I don't know if you ever remember it. And it became we went out to Rockin' Robins. Then we did this. It became the Swinging Donkey because of licenses and stuff like that. And I started out in there. I can't remember. I must have been about 2-3 years clean. And I would have partied a lot, obviously, when I was using, and very much into the kind of pill scene. And to go in there and start DJing was, you know, after 2 years giving up drinking drugs, was, you know, an strange experience, but the same thing. I loved it. I had a protection in the DJ box. I was part of the party, and like that, I enjoyed being the center of it. And, you know, it was chart DJing, so it was a different choice of tracks, but I still enjoyed, you know, getting a crowd going, getting them singing along with stuff. But one of the things that kind of I wondered, because I became known in the area because I was well known for DJing every weekend, and they know my face. And I was also well known before that for being a drug dealer. So the change from being this DJ in the middle of it, I became known as the lad that didn't drink and do drugs and DJ'd. Did that kind of persona follow you? Did people around you know that you weren't into drinking, that you were living a kind of sober lifestyle while living this lifestyle at the same time, you know? That interests me, I wondered.
Yeah, it's a funny one, because the initial impression from most people, from what I could certainly ascertain, was that they assumed that I was into the drinking drugs lifestyle. And there seemed to be, anytime somebody, and I mean, I never made a big deal of it. I don't make a point of telling people I do or I don't do anything. But once people, I suppose once my name started to get out there as a dance DJ, and there was a bit of a profile building, it did start to spread a little bit, just say amongst other DJs, oh, John only drinks water and he doesn't come to the after party or whatever. And that started to filter down. And the one thing I noticed about it, whenever somebody discovered that, if you like, they would always approach me, and they were genuinely really, really surprised or shocked in some cases. And that extended then to punters as well. And I suppose as my profile grew, it did become a thing. It was like, oh, he's the one who doesn't do all of that. How does he go so mad on stage? And you'd get people, and sometimes you'd see it on online forums at the time, and people actually discussing that, and it was like, well, I don't believe for a minute that he's not off his tits when he's up on stage, because I'd be quite physical on stage. You know what I mean? I wouldn't be passive. I'd interact with the crowd. And I mean, I think it's indicative of the mindset of the person who's observing or making that assumption. It certainly doesn't reflect on me in any way. And I think it shows that so many people, they couldn't possibly fathom, because they couldn't themselves go to an event like that without the extra help, if you like, using quotation marks there. They would assume that somebody who is up as the center point of that party must be the same as them. And a lot of people, I think, kind of project their own image onto everyone else. And a lot of us are guilty of assuming that people around us are the same as us. We're all completely different. So it did become a thing, yeah. And for quite a while, it was like it would have been that association. You'd even see it in like a newspaper piece or a magazine interview or whatever. It would be like, now, John, you're known for kind of eschewing the party lifestyle. Why is that? And the question would be asked. Whereas it wasn't of others, and even some who, I mean, it's amazing considering the preconceived notions that are out there. So many DJs, particularly anyone who's DJing at a high level, it's very, very rare now that they would be partying. It's treated very professionally. I mean, there are obvious exceptions, but back in the rave days that I suppose we're talking about, it would be very, very rare that a DJ wasn't drinking a bottle of vodka on the decks or taking pills or whatever it might have been, doing coke in the back room. You'd see it on DJ riders, which is like the part of the contract with the extras. So there was a DJ fee and there'd be a tech spec on the contract. And then the DJ rider is generally, what do they drink and do they need anything else? And it could be coded. So I remember one incident when I was promoting a gig in Dublin, and there was a DJ coming from Poland or somewhere in Eastern Europe, and he had on his rider for the contract, it was like he wanted Mary Jane. And I thought, Mary Jane, what the hell is that? And I mean, in my naivety, I was a huge Cypress Hill fan. I still am, but growing up, so I was rapping along to tracks about Mary Jane and this, that, and the other. But I mean, it was on this contract. I didn't link the two for whatever reason, because my mindset wasn't to link drinking drugs to the rider on a contract. So I had no idea, and I thought, okay, maybe he wants hookers. Does he want hookers? Is that? And I still couldn't think that this was drugs. And anyway, the first thing he did when he was collected from the airport was he asked the driver, look, what's the story with the Mary Jane? And it became this thing. And anyway, we managed to resolve it or whatever. And he agreed to play without his Mary Jane because there was none prearranged. But like, that's how detached I was from it. And that's how attached others were to it, albeit we were in the same kind of position as promoters and DJs. So yeah, that was my experience of it. At the start, nobody knew anything about it. But when people started to first notice it, it was a thing. It was a big, big thing to a lot of people. They just couldn't believe it.
John, can I just jump in there for 1 second? Because there's just something that when you were talking about it there, it's after clicking in my head. Like, it did intrigue me when I heard it first. And we went on to your podcast, and Colin had said to me, we're going on John's podcast, and he said, it's very good. Like, and I presumed it was like a dance music thing, you know, and I hadn't listened to it. And we went on, and I was like, as we were doing it, I was like, Jesus, he's very professional, like, you know. And so when I went back and listened, I was blown away. I was blown away by the content. I was blown away by the subjects and your knowledge of them, the way you dealt with them. Some very, very difficult subjects, like, you know, and some very brave stuff talked about, I felt. But what came across was your kind of independent, even the people you had on it, these independent thinkers, independent spirits, kind of libertarian kind of people, like, you know, and like, you know, your thought process, and that for me links back into, I know you were saying you kind of fell into it and stuff like that because of your age and all those type of things, but many people start going into those environments at those ages and still take up drinking drugs and still go towards that, you know. But like, I would have had that kind of independent libertarian kind of spirit when I was young. Like, when I was doing my confirmation, everyone was taking the pledge. Everyone was pledging that they wouldn't drink. Now, I drank at this stage, and every bit of me intended to continue drinking. So when they said to me I was going to make a pledge, my natural thing was to go, sure, that's ridiculous. I'm not taking a pledge when I'm not going to stick to it. Yeah. So, like, out of 98 kids, 2 schools of children, I was the only one that didn't take it, sitting in the middle as they all went up to the bishop. Like, and I'd still say to this day, I'm the only one that didn't do it. And, you know, but just to show the difference, John, you know, I mean, this is something that's after clicking in me, you know what I mean? I went on to drink heavily and to take drugs and do all those type of things. And specifically when I went into the rave scene, my independent spirit just diminished. I used to always dress differently. I listened to different music. I did all those type of things. And it started to morph. I started to dress similar to everyone else. You know, my thoughts, you know what I mean? My thoughts dulled down. I didn't question things in the same way. I just went along with everything, you know? And to see where I went with it, which was like a very, very different path, and to see the way you have been able to continue on that spirit, you know what I mean? It's just striking to me, you know what I mean? And, you know, it's just, for me, I linked the two things. I linked the fact that you didn't go down the road of excess, and, you know, and how your mind has stayed in that kind of way. You stayed true to yourself. Well, that's the way it seems to me, that you've stayed absolutely true to yourself, you know, and whereas I didn't, and I've been in a process of trying to get back there, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Even the pledge thing is interesting, because I hadn't thought of this in the longest time, but I remember everyone in our class were taking the pledge as well, and generally it was taken till 18, and everybody would laugh because they were going to break it, like you say. And I remember thinking, okay, well, there might be a bit of peer pressure to drink. I'm going to take it till 16. And I remember it horrified the teacher. And at the time, you can't take it till 16. You can't be drinking at 16. And I remember saying at the time, well, look, there's a chance a lot of people do drink around 16. And I don't want it, same as you, Mick, I don't want to take the pledge if I'm going to break it. So I took it to 16 and I kept the pledge. I remember I was the only one in the class who kept the pledge, obviously because I'd taken it till a younger age. But yeah, that kind of independent thought. I was never the coolest growing up. You know, I wouldn't have been like particularly streetwise, and I wouldn't have been like one of the leaders in the group who would have tried things first. But one thing I always was pretty steadfast in my own mind, and I did like to think independently, and that was my kind of way of covering up any insecurities I had. I internalized it, and I thought about it myself, and I decided, right, if I don't have the confidence to do something or say something externally, well, how do I get this out? And it was to tease over thoughts. And I'm quite a stubborn person as well, I think, as a result of that. But yeah, I did manage to maintain that independence. And I've never actually thought about that in the way you presented to me there. That because I didn't maybe have the influences, and I was able to, and I mean, it wasn't again a conscious thing, but subconsciously nurture that or allow it to develop or at least remain. And Alchemy Radio has been a kind of journey in relearning or unlearning for me as well, because I rejected, once I had finished school and college, I became quite anti-authoritarian, and I kind of rebelled against the system in a way that some people might rebel against the system through drink or drugs or through falling into crime and this kind of thing, whatever it might be. My form of rebellion was a kind of a more thought out thing, in that I started to think about where I was in life, and I'd finished my degree and I was doing something, that being DJing, which was a little bit outside the box. I mean, still to this day, it's, oh, John, you're still doing the music, are you? You know, like, you're still doing that. And at the time it would have been, well, when are you going to get a real job? You know, and people have accepted that this is my job now. But at the time they hadn't, and it was like, how long are you going to do this after college? When are you going to go back and do something with your degree? And I was constantly kind of being met with this, and I was thinking, well, do you know what? Feck ye. I'm not going to go back and do it. This is what I want to do. I have no intention of doing something I don't want to do at this point for money. And in school, I had thought, of course, well, I'll do whatever I can get the most money out of, or whatever's expected of me, you know, by not so much parents, because they never put huge pressure on me to do anything in particular, but let's say society. If you do well in exams, you have to become A, B, C, or D. You're certainly not going to become a DJ if you do well in exams, you know. So I thought, well, this is my form of rebellion. And that extended then to, well, looking at things like laws, and why are we told, just because it's written down on a piece of paper, that we have to act in a particular way, or that we have to function within society in a particular way? For example, why do I have to give somebody 60 quid or 80 quid if I've parked my car in a particular spot that's supposedly owned by the people, which I am one? So, I mean, the very system that tells us that the people are the ones with the power, and that we get to elect people to represent us. We're being told by those people who supposedly represent us for our own good that we can't do A, B, and C, and D, and that they're the ones who grant us our rights. Well, to me, that was just bonkers. I mean, our rights are inherent, and there's a thing like natural law, which exists, and then there's man-made law. And to me, man-made law is absolutely bonkers. I mean, who are you, or who am I to tell you what you can and can't do? Whereas man-made law, which is do what you want, really, as long as you're harming nobody or nothing else, is the most natural thing in the world. I think children understand that. We're born with that inherent knowledge. So what I'm getting at is, I felt as time went on that was always kind of in me. That was my rebellious spirit. And Alchemy Radio, like latterly over the last, 6 or 7 years since I started it, has allowed me to really tease out and to even exhaust some of those points with people who have a lot more knowledge on specialist subjects than I ever would have had. And I think it's allowed me to get a much broader sense of what I expect from myself in the world, but internally as well, what not to expect from other people, because I don't have the right to expect anything of anybody else. Do you know what I mean? And I would have been quite steadfast in my views that, well, I think a particular way, everybody else needs to see the light. You know, everybody else needs to think this way because I'm so enlightened. And it was only when I started to unremember, Mick, to go back to what you were saying about kind of relearning, I needed to relearn my whole way of thinking and how to think. I had to relearn how to think and to critically analyze the world around me and information, and to learn to discern, because I think the schooling system, I hesitate to call it the education system, but the schooling system puts us in a particular way of thinking. And while that may produce many doctors and many lawyers and many people who have capacity to earn a lot of money, who get all the media headlines and the attention, how many people does that mess up on a subconscious level or an emotional level or any kind of spiritual level? I would say the vast majority, including me, who would have been perceived to have done well in school and to have done well in college or whatever. That whole system messed me up to a large degree, and I had to relearn. I had to unlearn what I had learned. And I mean, this isn't the path for everyone. This is just my path, you know. I mean, it's fine if someone wants to be a doctor or a lawyer. That's totally fine. But for me, it just didn't feel right. So as I see kind of the journey, the alchemy journey, and just my journey through life in general, and music is a part of it now as well, I try and be consciously aware of everything that I'm doing and the reasons for doing it, and not to drift. And I think I'll always be learning. And I mean, every time I listen to your podcast, I learn something. I learn something about a different perspective that I never would have been exposed to if I didn't listen to that podcast. Or I might be walking down the street, and if I choose to open my eyes to what's going on around me, I might learn that, you know what, the birds still do sing in an urban area. It's a harmless little thing, but there are so many things out there for us to learn. But if we're always focused on an exam, or we're always focused on the expectations of our peers or our parents, our family, or whatever it might be, we lose all of these things. And to me, they're the magical little things that life is about. It's not about, oh, I'm the biggest DJ in the world, or it's not about, oh, I earn the most money, or I've taken the most drugs, or even I've given up drugs or drink or whatever it might be. Look at how great I am. To me, that's not what life is about. To me personally, life is just about that learning experience and that journey, because to me, that is the magic of life. I mean, if I wanted to earn more money, there are a million and one things I probably could have done. There are infinite things I could have done. But I chose a path that for me scratched a creative itch in terms of music. It allowed me to foster and develop a career for myself on my own terms. And then the work that I do with Alchemy and the amount of kind of sideline learning that I do, I'm always doing courses and bits and pieces, that just stuff that interests me for me, that I don't put out there in the world. That's the real adventure. You know, I mean, if we don't learn about ourselves first and foremost, what can we learn about the world externally? Personally, I don't think I can learn a whole lot about the world out there if I don't know myself first. And I don't think that learning is ever going to end. So, I mean, I know I've been speaking ad nauseum there, Mick, in response to what you said, but what you said really resonates with me. And even going right back to the pledge, that independent spirit, I think we all have it. I think we're all born with it to varying degrees. Some of us know how to express it better from an earlier age. Some of us bloom and blossom much later than others. But I think we all have it inherently. And I think it's credit to anybody. Like, I mean, the four of us are chatting here, and to varying degrees. We have all relearned that spirit, you know what I mean? Because I do think that the education system and the system that is in place, society, if you want to call it that, around us, doesn't allow for that to flourish, and doesn't allow, people can be very successful within that system. But what is success? To me, it's not about wealth or perceived wealth or money or status. To me, it's actually about self-development and having a positive impact then on the people around us, not forcing our opinions or our views or anything like that on the people around us, but let's say family, people who we love or who we may be responsible for if we've kids and things like that. I mean, it's to maybe show others that there is an alternative path and then allow them to independently walk down whatever path they choose, because ultimately it is down to personal choice and individual responsibility. And I think if we don't try and foster that in the world, in ourselves first, it can't grow in the world around us. So that's kind of where I'm at with Alchemy, and even with music as well. I mean, I've the decisions and the choices that I've made in my life over the past 10 years in particular are ones that I try to make for me first and foremost, but ones that might have a kind of positive impact on those around me as well, because I do feel I have a responsibility to myself and others, you know, and that exists outside of society. That's just I suppose on a spiritual level, for want of a less esoteric word, you know, I think it is a spiritual journey that we're on, and it's one that I choose to tread, and I tread it carefully at times, and at other times I'm gung-ho, but I learn from it all the time, and I don't think there is anything that we can't learn from. So there are no negative experiences, there are just difficult ones, and what might seem like the most terrible thing in the world. For example, I'll give you an example, and cut across at any stage if I'm talking too much here, but
go for it. There
was a kind of a moment, like roughly 10, 11 years ago. I was in a long-term relationship for about 7 or 8 years, and that ended really suddenly. I had no idea it was coming, and it was just boom, over. And in my head, without ever really sitting down and thinking about it, I assumed, right, this was it. This was my picket fence existence. You know, I'd fallen into this comfortable thing that obviously she hadn't, or she wanted something different from it. But like, that was the shock to my world. I mean, that was my big moment, my crisis moment, my rock bottom, you know. And I changed a lot after that. It was a very, very slow and gradual change, and I ended up seeking help for mental health issues afterwards. And best thing I ever did. It set me on this journey of personal development that certainly I developed more in the last 10 years, I think, than I probably had in the years. I mean, I'll be 40 this year. Probably in the years between 10 and 30, I developed less than I have in the last 10 years. I mean, obviously our first 7 to 10 years are extremely formative, but it set me on this journey. I think without that shock that I received, I wouldn't have. It was like there was a conscious shift in me, and I started to develop and to grow and to learn, to decide, well, hang on a minute, I can't let others be responsible for my happiness, which I think I was doing. And I realized there had to be full personal responsibility for my own happiness. And only then, if I was happy, could I have a positive impact on those around me. And that is kind of the crux of where I'm at in terms of how I try to grow and develop. It's take personal responsibility, own your mistakes, own the good part, the good decisions and the good things you do as well, but also own your mistakes, because only when we own those mistakes can we truly learn from them. And people can tell us how to do something, or we can read as many books as we want, but until we actually experience something, I think it doesn't really sink in on the subconscious level. And the subconscious is the drive. I mean, if we can learn to access our own subconscious and influence it for the better, we're going to become better people. And that's just what I try to do. And Alchemy has been a big, big help in terms of exposure to other people who I never would have been exposed to otherwise, to sit down and have a chat for an hour and a half with people such as you guys, or such as whoever it might be on Alchemy Radio. And it's funny because we really do attract people to us, you know. I mean, the more I'm exposed to this kind of an energy or this kind of a vibe, the more people come to me, and everything becomes less of an effort and less of an effort. It becomes more and more fun, and suddenly the journey that was so tough 10 years ago at the start becomes something that I'm really engaged with and really interested in, and that I love. And to me, that's magic. I mean, that's a form of spiritual alchemy, and that's why I named the show Alchemy. You know, it was to try and take something and turn it into something else, change it into something else, but to do it on a spiritual level. You know, I mean, we're not trying to make gold out of lead here, but isn't that what life is about? Aren't we trying to get from where we start off whenever we're born to as enlightened or as raised as we possibly can be? And it's funny, there's one term that I hear, particularly when I hear parents discussing their children, it's, yeah, well, I've reared him or her well. That really gets to me because words have meaning. And to me, my job as a parent isn't to rear anybody. My job is to raise somebody, which is completely different. It's to raise that consciousness and to allow a child to raise themselves. It's about getting as high. I think our journey here is to raise our consciousness, and ultimately whatever happens afterwards, I think the higher we are going into that transition, when we finally leave this plane of existence, whatever it might be, I think the higher our vibration, the further advanced we will be. Maybe we come back again, I don't know, and maybe we are reincarnated if our consciousness isn't where it should be. I mean, I'm not saying I have any answers here, I don't know, I'm just speculating and kind of thinking out loud.
Yeah.
But I think our job, any of our jobs as parents, is certainly to raise children and not to rear them. And I think that extends to the people around us. You know, I mean, Absolutely. If we can help other people to raise themselves, isn't that what we're here to do? I think we are. We're here to create and to raise our consciousness. And anything beyond that is kind of secondary to me, anyway. Yeah,
John. Just when you, sorry, I have to get back to a word that you said there. That you said in our podcast as well, which just my ears pricked up, and I was like, And you said like we discuss topics on this podcast such as spirituality, and you went on and you named other things. I was just like, again, this was just, I didn't understand your podcast at the time. And but when you mentioned spirituality, I was just like, oh. And so I was really interested that you'd speak of that, because like we haven't talked that word spirituality, like, you know what I mean, it's barely come up in our podcast, even though it's a part of well, certainly my life and, you know what I mean, my journey and stuff. I have one question before we go any further. The Alchemy, the name, you mentioned Paulo Coelho in one of your podcasts, and that just clicked in my head, and I went, The Alchemist, the book. And I can remember years ago, that was the first book I read, like when I started on my kind of spiritual kind of journey, and I gave it to Colin. And Colin, I remember Colin saying he gave it to you, and I totally forgot that.
The synergy here is
that's what I'm on about. You know what I mean?
Wow.
It's like.
Did I give you that book, John?
You did, yeah. You recommended it.
You did, because you came back and told me.
Yeah,
and I'd forgotten
sitting at the kitchen table, bawling my eyes out. I read it in one go, and I thought, this is just mind-blowing.
That was the start.
That book, it's my favourite book of all time. And
Jesus Christ, that's class.
That is class. That's class. I was there at work, I was listening, and I was like, please let that be the reason. You know what I mean? I was just like, that is awesome. Like, you know what I mean? Because it was my very first book that I read on the journey, you know, and it just resonated so much. And it just kind of changed my whole view. You know what I mean? It was just, there was a truth to it, you know, that kind of resonated in me. It was just like, I read it, and just a deep truth that just clicked. And I was like, that's the truth. Like, even though it's a fictional book, it's written like it just tapped into something, and so I'm absolutely delighted. And it's like it's just another one of those things that was just surprised. And this is the great thing about meeting people, and I love meeting people that, you know, like just subconsciously I had a vague kind of outline of the type of person you'd be, and it's just been totally turned on its head. Like, every time I hear about you, I mean, it's turned on its head. But about the spirituality side of things, like, you know what I mean, it's like, have you, like, you know, you were saying you went in, you got some professional help, and that's great. Like, I mean, a lot of stuff you're talking about, we've talked about on the thing, like taking responsibility for your mistakes and accepting your faults and also your assets and all those type of things, which is fantastic. But do you have any, what would you say, a practice, or, you know, I've heard like people talking about different things, like, you know, Japanese energy work and all this type of thing on your podcast. Is there anything that you practice in your life, say, for your spirituality? Is there anything that you'd follow or practice or anything like that?
Yeah, well, there is an overarching thing which I'll come to in a second, but I've tried lots of different things. I mean, for example, let's take yoga, for example. I've done quite a bit of yoga over the years, which at various times I found very helpful, and at other times it had no positive or negative effect on me. I think it depends what's going on in our lives at particular times, both, I suppose, in terms of on the physical level, but also on the spiritual level. Like, I've done lots of different courses and things. Even the books that I read will change depending on what's going on in my life. I mean, The Alchemist, just to go back to that very briefly, that's a book that I can pick up, and I've probably read it 50 times. And I can pick up and read at any given time, no matter where I am, because that's a book that the truth that you talked about resonates at all stages of the journey that I've experienced so far. But there are other books then that you can kind of read at one stage of your journey, and then you go back to them in a few years' time, and they're just not as relevant. But the one overarching thing, I mean, that is constantly there for me is to be honest with myself, number one. And I see that as a spiritual thing. And I mean, there are different ways I can be honest. For example, I don't mean like don't tell lies to myself per se, but if I'm meditating, for example, to be honest to myself in meditation is not to tell myself anything. It's to actually just devote myself to that for that 5 minutes or that 10 minutes that I'm doing it. It's to literally commit to it and do it to the best of my ability, because otherwise I'm cheating myself out of that 5 or 10 minutes. So if I'm in work and I'm working on a piece of music, it's to do the best that I possibly can, to be the best that I can be in a way that demonstrates to myself an integrity that should be fundamental to everything that I do. So that honesty and integrity is, again, I'll give you another example. If I see that something is wrong, this is a real life example. I got a parking ticket a number of years back, and I hadn't been parked in the spot that, I mean, I had paid whatever it was. Whatever it was, I felt I was wronged in that instance. And I talked to a couple of people about it, and there were a couple of family members who were involved in it all. And I said, look, what can I do here? Like, I'm in the right and they're in the wrong. And they said, look, just grin and bear it, pay the money and it'll be gone. And I just couldn't accept this. I thought, no, that's not the way it should be. I'm not being true to myself if I don't stand up for myself in this instance. And again, even at school, it was the only thing that would get me in trouble. I wasn't bad in school, but I would regularly get in trouble, particularly in 5th and 6th year, because if I had a point or I thought I was right about something, I would stand on that and I wouldn't be moved from it unless it could be demonstrated that I was wrong. So I decided I was going to go to court with this parking ticket. And I mean, that to me, it was scary. I'd never been in court and it was terrifying and the whole lot. What I did to empower myself was I learned just a couple of the specific laws around the parking side of, say, the Road Traffic Act. So I didn't go and learn the law. I just learned what was pertinent to my argument. And I realized, right, if I can demonstrate A, B, and C, well, then the law is actually on my side and they have to prove that I didn't do what do you know what I mean? So anyway, the long and the short of it is I got off that parking ticket, and everybody said to me afterwards, you got away with that, fair play to you got away for that. And to me, like, that really irritated me because I didn't get away with it. I wasn't the winner in that case. I just stood up for myself and didn't allow them to get away with something, you know. And it took kind of blood, sweat, and tears, and a lot of hours of learning just for that 60 quid parking ticket or 80 quid, whatever it was at the time. And again, people would say to me, "You're mad. Why did you waste all that time?" But to get back to my the question that you asked me, Mick, that was me being true to myself. That was an example of that in the real world. And to me, that's far more powerful because I can look back and I can say I acted with integrity there. And it doesn't really matter what the outcome was. I acted with integrity. I did the right thing. I know that was the right thing. That decision resonated with me. And the fear disappeared once I made the decision and decided, right, this is what I'm going to do. It didn't really matter what the outcome was. Obviously, it was preferable that I got away without having to pay any money. But that wasn't why I did it. I did it because I wanted to be true to myself. And I mean, there are many, many things we can do. We can do courses, we can meditate, we can do yoga, we can play sport, we can do whatever it is. We can watch movies to look after our mental health. But to me, it's to be true to myself at all times. I find that if I suffer if I know I've had to concede on that level, and if I have acted with what to me isn't the utmost integrity. And I do realize that life gets in the way of things and we have to make compromises. I get that. I'm not talking about where we make a compromise, where there are I mean, two people in a relationship, or there might be a mother and a daughter, a father and a child, two friends or whatever. I understand in those relationships, personal relationships, we compromise. But I'm talking about with myself. I mean, we can compromise with integrity as well. So for me, it's about owning my own thoughts, owning my own actions, being responsible for myself, and acting with honesty and integrity. That's the most spiritual thing that I feel at this point I can do for myself. And I think it's something that I can, it's almost like a maxim that I can take with me right through to wherever this path eventually leads to. You know, I think it's kind of an inviolable or an infallible maxim. I think it's one that we're born with, that we may not understand when we're born with. And if we are lucky enough to become aware of it, and to stand on that then at some point in our lives, I think it's one that we can't ever forget. I mean, there's no going back for me at this stage, even if it means making hard decisions, or decisions that lead to a consequence that I may not enjoy. I still know deep down that I've done the right thing for me on a spiritual level. And I think if we want to be holistic beings, we have to look at the spiritual side of things. It's all very well to go to the gym and to get big muscles, and it's all very well to go to the finest universities and to get the greatest degrees and to earn a lot of money and a great job. But if you don't have that extra part of the Holy Trinity, if you like, that third element, which is the spiritual element, what are you really? You're still not a complete being. So, I mean, to me, it's about care, will, intelligence, and imagination. It's all those things. I mean, it's almost like a quadrivium rather than a trivium. And I think if we can get all those things working on some level, then we're in a position to grow. And I'm only talking about myself. I can't speak for anybody else. But to answer your question, again, it was a long-winded answer, Mick, but in a nutshell, my routine is to consistently be as honest as I can with myself and to act with integrity. And that comes above and beyond any kind of, say, other routine. I mean, when we talk about routines, it's, well, what's your skincare routine, or what's your meditation routine, or how many candles do you light? That's all fine. That's grand, whatever. But for me, my routine is just to be honest, act with integrity, and take personal responsibility. And I get it wrong all the time. I'm not saying that I have it right. I mean, I'm constantly learning how to do that. But if I have this overarching thing, I mean, if you could see what I'm physically doing here now, it's a shame we don't have the camera, but if I have that rainbow that I exist underneath, and it's constantly act with integrity, well, I can't go too far wrong, really, can I?
No.
It's John, like listen to your own kind of routine and practices. It's amazing the amount of similarities that you would have with us, say. A journey I probably would have never ended up on a journey of self-development and self-improvement and living that kind of way for so long, and being open-minded and honest with myself, like you said there, honest with that's one of the biggest parts of my life, is being honest with myself. And it allowed me to not drink for over 12 years and take drugs for over 12 years in an environment that's full of it, you know. And even with you going to these gigs and going to these things, it's like that honest. If I answer myself honest all the time, I'll never ever put myself wrong. And it's the one thing you call spiritual foundations and stuff like that. It's the one thing that I cherished and held on to all my life, like all my sober life, if you want to call it that. Yeah. So it's very interesting to hear you saying that. Even when you broke up, that time when you broke up with a girl, and it's, you know, you don't have to be a drug addict or a fucking alcoholic or have issues with alcohol in order to end up in absolute depths of depression and feel all those things that you did. Like, because when you're talking about that, I felt that before, the lostness, you know, I've felt all that stuff for different reasons, obviously for relationships as well and that, like, but I mean, when you give up drinking drugs, which in my case were literally my best friend, were my fucking you know, they were always there for me at every moment. They were my family. They were my fucking sleeping tablet. They were everything. And then to knock that up, and I always liken it to grieving, you know, or losing something. And like I joke about it before, when I was listening to James Blunt and all when I give up drink and all the first, but I can't explain why else I would listen to that shite. Like, you know what I mean?
I can be honest, I really like James Blunt.
Hey, listen, I ain't knocking Blunty,
here's
man.
Synchronicity for you. I did an interview earlier on today, a music interview, and it was like, what's your guilty pleasure? Okay. And my guilty pleasure, I mean, I've many of them. I don't feel that guilty about them. Ultimately, I like the music that I like, you know, but it was James Blunt that I listed. And the reaction was, what the fuck? I mean, you listen to James Blunt? What? You're a dance DJ. You can't listen to James Blunt. That's so uncool. But it's just funny. Whenever you say James Blunt, I think to myself, I could actually relate to where you were. Still.
I did. I really like this. Still now I have a playlist of James Blunt on my fucking Spotify, if I'm being honest. Like, I mean, every now and again I'll crack out the guitar and bang out a few Blunty classics.
No, it's really interesting what you say though, because the one thing that I said to you when I first heard your podcast, lads, was that it resonated with me, and I think we're only teasing out the reasons why now, because it is amazing the journey that we've all been on. We all have our crutches at various points in our lives, and for me it was obviously that relationship in some sense was a crutch. I mean, I had invested so much of myself in that to the point that when that went away, it was to my detriment, you know. Ultimately it led me on a path of growth, but drinking drugs, I'm speculating here, but drinking drugs was possibly that kind of a thing for you as well. You know, that crutch that masked something deeper, it filled a gap, maybe there was a void filled for you. I don't know, but I think we all have it. Everybody has it to a certain degree. I mean, none of us are Buddha here, you know. I mean, we've all got our stuff to deal with, and we go on different paths. And I mean, some of the stuff I would have done to myself, just on a mental level, and even the way I would have driven myself to work and to earn money. I mean, that was my thing, you know. That was my drug. That was what fueled me for a long time. It was to make. I remember even
workaholic.
Young, yeah, total workaholic, and I still work a lot, but I'm now working in a space that I enjoy. Like, it doesn't feel like work to me anymore. You know what I mean? I have a job and I do fairly long hours, but if I feel it's becoming work, well, I can pare back from it again. And I think it's I think we all have these issues that, hindsight being a great thing, are incredibly common to us all, even though on the surface they seem to be radical or polar opposites. And I think that's why your journeys, as I heard you describe them on the podcast, have continued to hear you describe them, have resonated so strongly with me, even though I didn't drink or take drugs in the way that you did. I think spiritually and emotionally, we've gone through a lot of similar things in our lives. And I think we all do. I mean, not just the four of us, but so many people. Everybody does to a certain degree. And just talking about honesty again, I think if we're willing to have that cold, hard look in the mirror and be honest with ourselves, I think that is the start of our regeneration, or our remembrance of what we can be and the potential that we all have.
Really powerful listening to you, John, you know. And firstly, I'd like to thank you really, really for your honesty. Like, Jesus, powerful to listen to. I mean, as you said, like, we all have our journeys, and to come on here and be so honest about it. I mean, I can identify with the whole thing. I mean, I rested my happiness, obviously, as the lads did, in drinking drugs for a long time. And like you, I was in a relationship, and that was, when that ended, I think it was about 7 years off drinking drugs, and I'd stayed in that relationship from the start of giving up drinking drugs. And when that ended, you know, I went into a dark place, and I had to do some real soul searching, and I think that for me was like the start of the kind of spiritual journey. And geez, everything that I listened to you there share about was, I really, really identify with. And it's amazing to hear it coming from someone who you know, who's not kind of gone into the kind of mad drug abuse that the likes of myself has gone into. To hear your journey in a different way is very, very interesting, and thanks for being so honest.
No, it's a pleasure. I mean, there's no point having the conversations if we're not honest. And I mean, you pretty much bare your souls every time you come on the podcast, and by nature, the work that I do, I mean, obviously I can invest emotional energy in what I'm doing musically and creatively and with Alchemy as well. But Alchemy, it's slightly different. It's funny being on this side of the interview. You know, I'm so used to being on the other side of the interview, and generally I don't express too many views because I like to give the guests the platform to speak. And I mean, it is their platform. It's why I've invited them on in the first place. And when it comes to music, I'm a lot more guarded in that there is kind of a persona that's out there. I see the world of showbiz and entertainment as ultimately so much of it is acting. You know, I mean, everybody, we all wear masks every day of the week. We know that. But I mean, the ultimate kind of mask is if you are, I suppose, an actor. And I see a lot of what I do musically and performance-wise in terms of public persona as being acting as well. You know, I'm essentially selling a product that is music, and it's the music that I love and that I invest a lot of myself in and work with a lot of other people who do the same with. But that's not the place for me to talk like I'm talking now, personally. Do you know what I mean? I think we have to exist in different... I mean, there are different pockets and facets of our lives, and this is quite a personal one. We're all speaking very, very personally here. I don't necessarily want to go on an interview where somebody wants to talk about music and start talking about my spiritual journey. Not that they might be fascinated by it, they might not, but to me, there's a time and a place, and it's particularly when surrounded by like-minded people and like-minded souls and people who are on an equal resonance. You know, I mean, it's very easy for us to have a natural, organic conversation about it now because we are on a particular, like we share a vibe. And I think sometimes when vibes come into conflict with people, that can lead to consequences that are not good for anybody concerned. And I think it would be neglect of me, for example, to start talking about this on my other podcast, Power, which is a music podcast. I mean, I keep the things completely separate. It's still me. I still invest myself in both, but in a different way. And again, it comes back to my kind of overarching rainbow. It's that integrity and honesty. I mean, while I might shy away from speaking about certain things in the world of music, I don't lie about it either. Do you know what I mean? It's just not something for discussion. And I think that's what works for me. And it seems to be fine with the people around me as well. So no, I really appreciate being given the platform. What I'm trying to say is I really appreciate being given the platform to actually speak, because this is a form of therapy for me. You know, it really is. I don't really get the opportunity to speak to others on this level all that often. And when I do, there is a huge physical discharge of energy for me right now. I mean, this conversation, I know I'm going to sleep like a baby tonight because there is I have a physical reaction to it. It's a positive physical reaction. But there's a huge discharge of energy over the last whatever length of time we've been speaking. And that's a rare thing for me. And it's really, really great. It's invigorating. I know tomorrow I'll be on top of the world because I've been supercharged by it. You know, I mean, I don't want to get too esoteric. I've said that a few times, but I'm being genuine when I say that. I really appreciate the kind of the relationship that we have in this hour between the four of us. And I mean, it extends obviously beyond that, but just this conversation, it is more than the sum of its parts for me. And it's something that I'll take with me as part of the journey. I mean, this is really, really cool. I'm really enjoying it.
Sorry, it's just we're coming close actually to the end of it. Anyone want to jump in there before we wrap it up?
Could I just jump in there because I've really enjoyed this, John. You know what I mean? And you know, I knew I would just from your podcast. If anyone's listening, please go on to Alchemy, John's podcast, and listen. And it's just to bring it back where you were saying there's a time and place to talk about things and all that type of thing. And like, we rarely bring up spirituality. And I think we haven't talked about not bringing it up. It just instinctively we hadn't, because it's such a loaded thing in places now. People misinterpret it. People miss it, like, you know, linking it with religion and people's views and all that type of stuff. But even what you're saying is to simplify it, like when you're saying about truth, like spiritual principles, honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, tolerance, all these things are principles of spirituality. And if you can instill them into your life in whatever practice or any way that you can, like you were talking about integrity. But like, I just think even when you're saying tomorrow, that you're going to be uplifted. Like, you know what I mean? And for me, that's it. There's an energy, there's a spirit. When you get truthful, when you get honest, when you link with people like we've done here, you know, that's where my spirit is. That's where I feel that I have a spirit, when it gets lifted, you know. And you know, so I it's been the same experience for me, John. Genuinely really enjoyed it, you know what I mean? And I like that it's we got to kind of incorporate spirituality into the conversation, and to kind of show that it can be a thing that's like, it's a practical thing. It's a practical thing when you can nurture it in yourself and in your life. There's great rewards to be had from it. And you know, so thanks for bringing that to the conversation.
No, it's a huge pleasure. And just to follow on from what you've said, I think there is a lot of spirituality in your podcast, even though you don't directly speak over it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Reading between the lines, I can feel that spirituality, and that's what really attracted it to me. Because, I mean, as you say, there are a lot of misconceptions about spirituality, and people immediately think about organized religion or whatever it might be. To me, that's not what spirituality is, and I know that's not what it is to any of you guys as well. So I think your podcast is a spiritual podcast on the level that we're speaking about. And thanks very much for introducing me to it. And it's a weekly part of my my listening diet, if you want to use that term. It's essential for me. I think it's great, and I think everybody should listen to it, and they'll gain something from it. Regardless of whether they've been, I mean, we're all on different journeys, but regardless of whether people have had problems with drink or substance or alcohol abuse in the past, it doesn't matter. I haven't, but I've had my own issues, and I can relate them to the journey that you speak about. So thanks a million for what you do, lads. I really appreciate it, and thanks so much for having me on.
No worries, because it is like that, man. It is like that. The drink and drugs are irrelevant, you know. Kind of, it's just what brought you to those feelings, really, initially, you know. And it's the same. Something brought you else, because it's fucking amazing how similar the whole thing is. Like how similar journeys can be in life, and like different things brought us to there, but at the end of the day the feelings are the same. And you know, the work that needed to be done was the same, the self-development. And you know, kind of, I always say it, I've said it to Mick a number of times, I've never seen a person to work as hard as you do. You know, you're a hard working individual, and that doesn't come, man, if you're acting the bollocks or anything like that. You know, that just comes from, like you said, personal growth and self-development and self-belief and honesty. It's something people get mixed up with as well all the time, is honesty. And it's something that I got mixed up with at the start of my journey, was honesty. I was like, fuck, I was honest in the wrong way, you know. People tell you to be honest, like, you know, in order to progress. And
I think you're a bollocks type thing.
Honest,
being honest, man.
Honesty without compassion. Honesty without compassion is, what is it, Danny?
Say that again.
Honesty without compassion is,
for me, well, it depends.
Brutality.
It could be cruel, just cruel.
Yeah, that's it.
Honesty is a cruel mistress.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that, just to finish, one of the things I'd like to say as well is, I've learned so much from listening to you, John, and stuff that I needed to hear today from what you said, like very much about being more kind of true to yourself. Sometimes I struggle with that. Do you know what I mean? I struggle with that even today. You know what I mean? And just the way you've kind of, even like in my early days in school, I really struggle with being true to myself and being myself. And obviously the drink and drugs helped me get away from that. Just listen to you. I admire the level of integrity you've carried throughout your life and the stuff that you've done. Yeah, it's been, and I've learned a lot from just listening to what you said today. And thanks again.
I know, I appreciate it. And there's just one little thought. I'm thinking out loud here, and I tend to veer towards verbal diarrhea from time to time. But there was something a guest on Alchemy said recently regarding the word spirit, and we've spoken about the word spirit here today a lot. And I started wondering, he was speaking about tinctures and how homeopathic remedies and that kind of thing, and how alcohol is used in those as the life essence, the life force exists in alcohol, which is described as a spirit. Why are spirits called what they are. And if we abuse a spirit, such as alcohol, spirits, liquor for the Americans, whatever, but the overarching term spirit, it just got me thinking. I don't have an answer. I'm just throwing it out there, maybe for people to think about. Why are spirits called spirits? What is the link between, say, alcohol in a purely alchemical or a spiritual sense, and spirituality and the soul, and what happens to us when we abuse spirit or mind or spirits? The effect seems to be quite similar. I think that there's something there that I need to tease out over the next while.
I'll give you a word, John. Essence. I'll give you a word, just essence. And I think that's linked, you know what I mean, that the alcoholic spirit is the essence of, potato, is poachine, the essence. And like the essence of us, what, is our spirit, that's our essence.
I love it. Mick, you're a wise man.
Hey, you can sing that for a 12-year-old to stand up in church like a motherfucking gangster and say he's not taking the place.
I dated a girl, and her mother said, honestly, she said, I will never forget that redhead sitting in the middle of all the seats. And she told me, she said, I could see by you didn't care. The whole church looking, and I was like, I didn't care. I was just like, yeah, whatever.
What a hero. I love it.
It reminds me of that Will Ferrell movie where he's fucking where they ask him, did you grow up with a dysfunctional background? Well, if you call being 12-year-old with a 35-year-old girlfriend.
That's another story.
Something like that, you know what I mean? You can imagine me heading down to the pub after the confirmation. Telling them all down there he told the bishop to go fuck himself.
Oh, brilliant.
If there had to been, what you call that fucking Snoop Dogg thing, or Tug Life. The Tug Life.
Oh, yeah.
That's the essence of Tug Life.
Well, it's good. It's good that we finished it, lads, with a bit of crack. And, you know what I mean? John, just thanks a million again. Fantastic. Everyone listen to Alchemy podcast. And we hope we'll have you back on again, John. Definitely. We'll have you back on again.
Always up for a conversation like this, be it on air or off air or whatever. It's invigorating. And thanks very much.
Hey, listen, John, you're going to have to, myself and Danny are organising a little get-together over in Tenerife in the new year. He has to come, isn't it, Dan?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, count me in. And by the way, I have a gig in Tenerife. Look at the calendar here. Bear with me. In the Kalua Beach Club in Tenerife on the 22nd of August. Kalua or Kaluna, something like that.
Yeah, it's a nice club.
Yeah, so I'm going to be there in August as well. So any excuse to go to Tenerife.
I think we should. I think Mick, we should try and make that journey out there.
I think so, man. I think I'm going to be in Tenerife in August.
Just for the 3 or 4 days, but next year, myself and Danny are working on a little thing out in Tenerife next year. We'd love to have you come along on it too, man. It'd be deadly, wouldn't it, Dan?
For shizzle, yeah. It's gonna be good.
I'd love it.
So listen, it's been a great podcast, and like the lads said, thanks a million, John. We really appreciate it, man, and. Best of luck in the future, and also, check out John's music on Spotify. It's fucking Pretty Young Thing is one of my favorite tracks of last year. When I realized how big it was when I was in a fucking Coles shop in Tasmania on the other side of the world, and there it is. Pretty Young Thing was playing in the fucking shop. I was like, holy shit, this is some fucking trippy fucking shit, you know what I mean? But yeah, man, I've watched you grow over the past 10 years, and it was true hard work and dedication, and it's great to see it. So yeah, we'll finish on that, and yeah, man, it's been deadly. Just to tell people to check out Alchemy Radio. Where else, John? What is there? Is that just the full name of it, Alchemy Radio?
Yeah, alchemyradio.net. So it's on iTunes, it's on Stitcher, all the usual places. The website is alchemyradio.net, and you can subscribe to any of them from there. And music-wise, djjohngibbons.com. Oh, lads, new single out on the 7th of June, actually. So, yeah, check it out.
Is it the one we were listening to in the Jeep or in the car one day on the way home? Was it you don't have to say the name of it, but it is that one, is it?
I think think it is. I'm not 100% sure which we were listening to, but I think
Is it a secret? It is.
It is right now. Depends
Okay, cool.
When this is actually going to air, yeah.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, still a secret tomorrow, yeah.
Is it still a secret tomorrow, John? Just asking for a friend.
Yeah, but from next Monday it won't be a secret, but tomorrow it is, yeah.
We'll throw it out there next weekend, but or next Monday. But yeah, and that's it. Just check us out. You can follow us on Instagram at That's Good Crack. Mick, what's our email address?
3, as in the number 3, drylads@gmail.com.
Dan the man, where are we on Twitter?
You can get us on Twitter on that_crack.
It's kind of funny, that one, isn't it? That crack, like, you know what I mean, like that. Never thought of it before now.
Every time I hear it, I think the same thing.
It's like, look at that crack on your one.
Yeah, boy.
Do you remember the first name? What was it? The first name we came up with was like the clean crack.
The clean crack. That was...
And someone said to me that could be taken the wrong way. Better not do that. Like
the clean crack.
God.
It literally translated to the clean ass.
Yeah.
That's where our brainstorm came up with, yeah.
And and then just hit us up on Facebook on That's Good Crack. But we love hearing from people. We always appreciate it. And it's kind of funny that you touched on spirituality, because someone actually direct messaged me the other day to say that they love how we kind of talk in a spiritual way without actually mentioning it. So yeah, that is really
out of the water.
Yeah, we shattered that today.
Sorry, whoever sent that text.
It was cool. No, but it's not like you said. We just don't want
full personal responsibility for that.
Absolutely.
We'll blame John.
I own that decision.
So listen, take care, lads. It was great chatting to you, John, and we'll talk to you next week, boyos.
Thanks a million, lads. Chat really soon. Cheers.
Don't forget to subscribe to That's Good Crack on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and wherever you're listening to it right now.